This episode is brought to you by Marantz Model 40N, ISA's Smart Amplifier of the Year. The most musical sound, simplified.
Welcome to another Dear John video in which I pluck some choice comments from a previous video. That video being one we published about 5 days ago about Roon Arc and how you can stream Roon out of the house now. And that video has done surprisingly well actually, because Roon is a bit of an audiophile niche thing, I think. But in 4.5 days, it's done almost 50,000 views, which is supremely impressive. So thank you for that. Thank you to everybody who left a comment. I picked some of my favorites, put them into a Google Doc. One of them is going to involve quite a lengthy answer today, actually, but we'll tackle some of the short and simple ones first. The first one comes from George Cambanis, and he writes, John, get an SSD. I've had multiple hard drives fail. They're unreliable. Yes, they are. And yeah, I use a normal hard drive, an external hard drive from, I've got to look over there, I think it's a Western Digital. I buy a new hard drive for my Roon server every year, or for my media server. And what I do is every time I buy one, I copy the contents of the old one to the new one, then put the old one away from this house as a backup. So I've got about 4 years of backups dotted about the place, really. But I'm aware, yes, hard drives are like light bulbs. They fail, always, eventually. So I'm hoping that, each one lasts a year, but even if it doesn't, I'm only going to lose a few months worth of data, I think. So if you haven't backed up your hard drive recently, I recommend you go and do it. But I should also add that yes, I will buy an SSD just as soon as a 4 terabyte SSD becomes affordable for mortals like me. So yeah, that's on the horizon, so it's not going to be long now until I go completely SSD with my external storage. Next comment comes from one Terry Rendelsvik, and he asks, do you have to have your Roon core open at home if you want to use Roon Arc outside? The simple answer to that is yes, absolutely you do. It's like any server application connection / configuration. If you want to use server software, you have to have the server running. So you can't close your laptop lid or anything like that. It's a bit like a web server. So a web server runs or hosts a website, and that software must be running to serve that website and its pages to any visitors. If you turn the web server off, then people can't access your website. So Roon Arc is a bit like that. It needs to connect to the Roon core, the server, electronically over internet wires in order to stream music from the hard drive attached to it. Next comment comes from Mike Sullivan, and he asks, can you use Roon Arc Player in your home while your phone is on your local network, or do you actually have to be off your local network, i.e. on cellular, to use Roon Arc? No, you can use Roon Arc on your local area network, your LAN, or you can use it out in the street. It doesn't matter. As long as there is a data connection between your phone and the Roon core server, then you're good. So I use Roon Arc to offline content before I go out of the house. I showed that in my last video. I think I was offlining an album by Alessandro Cortini because he took his music off Spotify, I think a few months ago. And so if I want to listen to that, I have to pull it from my Roon core server, so I offlined it here. So obviously my phone was connected to my LAN here, and then as soon as I step out of the building out the front, obviously the connection to my LAN breaks, and then I'm on 3G or 4G. There's no 5G in Germany yet, I don't think. Again, I could be wrong about that. Olaf, am I wrong?
You are wrong.
I'm wrong. There is 5G, but it's not in this neighborhood. It's not with my phone networks, but yeah. Okay. But yeah, 3G, 4G, local area network, it works. Next comment comes from Will X. This is quite a long one. He writes, I never thought I would bother with Arc. I used Qobuz when on the move. This was okay, but not always straightforward to find what I wanted. In Roon Arc, my Qobuz albums are there alongside my own rips and organized in a way that is intuitive to me. And I think, yeah, that's one of the great appeals of Roon, isn't it? Is that the sort of the border between a Tidal library and a Qobuz library and your own library is blurred. I think that's one of the great things about Roon. Moving onwards, he writes, I can also relatively easily move from listening to something at home to something on the move and then back again. It would be great if Roon made this even easier. Where I live, the mobile data plans are generous and the coverage is okay for my regular journeys. The download function will be of some use for longer journeys and when I'm out of range of mobile phone networks. Yeah, so I guess that's the point of offlining content, is that you either don't want to eat your mobile data allowance or you might kind of go off grid, so to speak. So I think Will gets it, he understands what Arc is all about, which is great. Olaf just reminded me that yesterday Roon added a new feature to Arc dedicated to offline mode. So you can effectively take Arc offline so that it looks like this, and you can see at the bottom of the screen it says Arc is offline. And that means you can't play anything from the cloud or from your hard drive full of tunes connected to your server unless you've downloaded them first. So I can still access the downloads in my downloads folder, but that's it, right? But yeah, that's kind of I think that's a useful feature. I don't know, I haven't really played with this too much yet, but it's available. Just to let you know, because Olaf just let me know. This is the last of the simple questions or simple comments. Grey Fool writes, I've been using PLEX for several years and love the freedom it gives. Does Roon offer any real benefits over PLEX? Is sound quality better, for instance? I would love to see a direct comparison of the two. I think a direct comparison is pretty tricky because you generally find PLEX clients, that means the streaming clients, are things that catch the stream and play the stream into an audio system. You generally find those on TV streamers or TVs. So there is a PLEX app for my Samsung Frame, there's a PLEX app for the Apple TV, there's a PLEX app for the Google TV, there's a PLEX app for the Xiaomi Mi Box S. But we generally don't find PLEX as a sort of, as a client embedded in hi-fi gear. But that's where we do find Roon Ready. So basically those clients play catch on Roon streams, then relay those into a hi-fi system or an audio system. So it's almost like they exist in two different worlds. Where there is a crossover, and maybe this is what Greyfall is alluding to, is with street streaming. Because PLEX have something called Plexamp, which is a bit like Roon Arc. It's been around for over a year or so. We made a video about it. So it works in the same kind of way as Roon Arc. I think the interface of PLEX is simpler because it doesn't have all the Tidal and Qobuz access. Well, it does, but it's not as elegantly implemented. There isn't the magazine layout that Roon gives us, whereas PLEX is a bit more basic. PLEX has a nice graphic equalizer, if you like that kind of thing. It's visually a bit more colourful, I guess, really. But the spicy thing about Plexamp is that PLEX, the company, have now taken that code and ported it over to a Raspberry Pi. So you can now create a remote streaming version of Plexamp and put it on a Pi, so then you can have that stream into an audio system, just a bit like Roon Bridge, really. But I think Plexamp for Pi is still in its early stages. I was going to make a video about it, but the thing is, it's really hard to buy a Raspberry Pi at the moment. So I'm not going to make a video about that because I think a lot of people just get annoyed at me because they're like, oh, I want to do this, but I can't buy a Pi. Fair enough. So know that you can do that if you have a Pi lying around. Just Google it, like Plexamp, Raspberry Pi, you'll find that kind of thing. So you can put, Plexamp on a Pi, you can put Roon Bridge on a Pi. But yeah, PLEX is more for like TV streamers and TVs, and Roon, or rather Roon Readiness, is mainly inside like streaming amplifiers, streaming DACs, streaming loudspeakers. Now this next comment is going to take a fair amount of time to tackle. And we start with a long comment. and it comes from Jorge Espinoza. I'll read the whole comment and then there'll be quite a lot to unpack. But let me read the comment first. It says, it's hard to believe that you did this video without once mentioning that in exchange for adding remote play, he means ARC, which was already available using Plexamp, but that's a different product. Roon has crippled its home server so that it now requires 24/7 internet connectivity in order to operate. Roon 1.8, the prior version, checked licensing once a month, but would let you run disconnected for days from the internet. In Roon 2.0, this was disabled, and now Roon 2.0 will not run at all without a live internet connection. Your music collection is hostage when offline. This is basically Roon turning its back on audiophiles in the third world countries or in parts of the world like the tropics where internet connectivity is not always guaranteed. Sure, if you live in Western Europe or parts of the northeast of the US, you may not have much empathy for how serious a detriment this change is to others, but I would have hoped that you would have addressed these concerns in your podcast. Yeah, we did a podcast interview with Roon CEO, Enno Vandermeer, and I thought he would have mentioned this if it was a thing. So I looked at Jorge's message or comment and thought, no, he's got to be wrong. And in fact, I did a test. I pulled the internet out of the wall so that my LAN was still running, but there was no internet connectivity, and pushed play on a bunch of local files and let them run. And it ran for like 5 hours. So I'm thinking, yeah, Jorge must be wrong here. He's got to be wrong. Roon would not just cut us off from our local files if our internet goes down. But it turns out that that is kind of what they're doing. Now, I only found this out from spending most of the day before yesterday trying to get hold of Roon and then talking to Roon about what's going on. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me for the last 3 weeks, there's been quite a lot of vocal activity on the Roon forum about this very issue, with people kind of up in arms about how they theoretically cannot access their local files stored on the hard drive using Roon even when the internet goes down. And I've got to say, part of me sympathizes with that position, because if we wind it back to 2015 when Roon launched, that was part of the appeal. Like, it was a method in which you could stream music from a hard drive attached to your Roon core, your server, with the augmentation, the optional augmentation of content from Tidal and Cobas. But I think in the last few years, sort of Roon have very slowly shifted their emphasis towards possibly more Tidal and Cobas streaming. I'm not saying they've forgotten about local file streaming, not at all. But I think, well, from speaking to Roon at length on, what day was it? I think it was on Wednesday night. I spoke to Danny Dulai from Roon for like 2 hours. And he was basically explaining to me that a lot of the tech that's available to him today was not available when they launched in 2015. So they couldn't have possibly foreseen what would become available. And Danny was basically saying that you won't get necessarily local file playback from Roon if your internet falls over. He says, you might get more, you'll probably get more, but Roon are guaranteeing 0 minutes effectively, right? And I found a comment to that effect on the Roon forum after digging, actually. I think, let me see if I think I did put it in my Google Doc here. Yeah, Danny writes, like, this may be the 4th time I've said it. This is from 21 days ago, actually. 0 minutes. You may find it to be longer, but different things will break at different and unpredictable times. You should not rely on Roon 2.0 working without internet access. Use 1.8 legacy if you need offline access. Now, 1.8 legacy is what Roon have added so that for people who don't like the Roon 2.0 upgrade for whatever reason, including not being able to stream local files without an active internet connection, but that's only going to be supported until the end of the year. And I said to Danny, I think that's pretty tokenistic. You know, I would love to see them support that for much longer than the end of the year. So part of me is very much in line with many of the people who feel aggrieved that they need internet connection to stream their local files. And I'll tell you why. it isn't about the reality. It isn't about like how often does my internet go down, because really in this apartment, hardly ever. And I think for most people, it's hardly ever. What I think many people are buying with Roon is security, like a security blanket, right? Whereby if your internet goes down, you no longer obviously get access to Tidal and Qobuz or Spotify or Apple Music, but at least you've got your goddamn local files streamable from Roon. And what Roon 2.0 does is remove that security blanket. Now, I think the other side of this coin also needs explaining, because the way Danny explained it to me was that basically he cannot take Roon forward, feature-wise, technological-wise, without moving a lot of the computation, or a lot of the sort of the under the hood stuff into the cloud. So basically an example is search. Up until Roon 2.0, there was a search sort of code base running on the core, and that would work with sort of your local content, but there was also a search code base in the cloud. And the way it's been explained to me by Roon is that the code base on the core has kind of reached a bit of a glass ceiling, whereas the code base in the cloud can go much further. So what Roon decided to do was to kill the code base for search on the core and just put it all in the cloud, which explains why you need internet connectivity for search. But Danny Dulai also explained to me that some of that cloud computational magic also relates to navigation. Because don't forget, Roon is like this software layer that sits over your library of local files, right? So you can click from this artist to this biography, then to this artist. And that is also, if it's not in the cloud already, I think they want to move it into the cloud because they can do far more with it. They can move it forward, technologically speaking, far more easily and add more features in the future by having everything like that in the cloud. So essentially what Roon want to do, I think, the way I understand it, is really move to sort of a cloud computational model. And that also has the benefit of taking some of the computational burden away from the Roon core. So if you're running core on, let's say, older hardware, it might run for longer because obviously the processing burden is being borne by the cloud, not your local machine. But that's a theoretical thing, and I'm not entirely sure about that. I think that's where it is. So you can kind of see Roon as, I guess, as a business, you know, like they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They want to advance their software, and to do so, they've got to move a lot of the feature set into the cloud. But if they do that, then they need to rely on the presence of an internet connection, which therefore has the side effect of cutting people off from their local files, possibly. Well, certainly after a certain amount of time. We just really, I guess it depends upon your luck really as to when that stops if your internet goes out. So it'll probably cope with like a half an hour outage or a 5-minute outage, but probably not always guaranteed. Again, obviously, as we know, they're guaranteeing 0 minutes, but chances are it will run for longer. So you can see, well, you know, if you were in Roon's position, you're like, well, do we sort of just draw development of Roon to a halt or slow it considerably, but allow people ongoing access to their local files if the internet goes down? Or do we take that security blanket away and then allow ourselves the opportunities to really expand the functionality of Roon? Now, in their shoes, I would do what they've done, because I want to see a future for Roon, and I would want to see, even if it's, you know, well, as a user, I want to see it expand and its functionality increase. And I guess if I was in charge of Roon, I would also want to see that, right? Because if you're not growing as a business, you're effectively dying. So you can't just have a stale software setup, because the world, as we know, especially as many of you guys are always telling me that the streaming world is moving at such an alarming rate. So Roon have to keep up with sort of cultural or computational or software changes. So I think they've made the right call, even though it upsets part of me, because part of me wants my security blanket, but part of me also wants the new features. And as Roon have fairly carefully explained it to me, I can't have both. We can't have both. So they've gone with the sort of new feature set angle. and ripped away the security blanket, which, yeah, it does kind of upset me a little bit. It really does. And I do feel for those people on the Roon forums complaining about this. Some of them are more polite than others, as you kind of expect on forums, but that's, I guess, forum life. Jorge's comment actually it was a little bit, I don't know, it was a bit spicy, because he's like, it's hard to believe you did this without once mentioning this issue. Now, the thing is, I didn't know about this issue. And if you say, well, I should have known about this issue, well, no, because throughout the beta testing, I think I had ARC for about 2 weeks before it was officially announced, but the beta testing had been running for months before that. And Roon hadn't told anybody about this always-on internet connection necessity, this requirement. So I wasn't told. And even when you look at the release notes of Roon 2.0, it says, Roon Core requires active internet connection. Now, when I saw that, in fact, I didn't even pay it much attention, because I'm thinking, well, yeah, that just means you need Tidal and Cobos to access those streams, right? I mean, there's nothing untoward or extraordinary about that sentence. But what it actually means is Roon requires active internet connection if you want to play local files. And it really should have said that. So I think there's a bit of a communication issue here that Roon need to tackle now. And they should learn from this, really. I think they really didn't communicate this in the best way possible, which is possibly why a few of them, users are very upset on the forum. I think a lot of these problems, this sort of change pain, can be managed better with better communication, always. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, because I bungle this, just as often as probably Roon do. But it is a communication issue as much as it is a technological issue. So I'm just laying out what I know now. I'm explaining really what I think the situation is and why things have changed between 1.8 and 2.0 and what are the reasons for that. I don't know anymore. I literally do not know anymore. It's like, John, do you know blah, blah, blah? No, I don't. I'm telling you everything that I gleaned from talking to Danny on whatever it was, 2 nights ago. So that's where we are with Roon Arc and the compromise that comes with 2.0. I guess if you're really upset about it and you want to jump ship from Roon, then you can either go to 1.8 Legacy and see how long that runs for, or you could go back to a Squeezebox server or go to a UPnP server. I wouldn't recommend that. You could go to Audivana. There are other options out there. I'm not saying they're necessarily as good as Roon, although I have a really big soft spot for Squeezebox. I really do. I might make a video about that soon, because I think it's something I need to revisit. But yeah, that's where we're at with Roon 2.0 right now. So yeah, this is kind of a long video. I'm sorry if it was a bit dry or boring for people that aren't really invested in this issue. But if you thought it was a useful video, then please give us a like down below. If you like my attitude towards, I guess, comment responses and digging into things that I don't know about, and where possible, speaking to the manufacturer about certain issues. I mean, I'm lucky that I know Roon pretty well, because I've been a Roon user since day one. So anyway, if you dig all of that, then please consider subscribing to this channel. And as always, thank you ever so much for sticking with this video so long and for watching.